Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Sunday, the second Sunday in Epiphany. The Gospel lectionary text for today comes from John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that of you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim, and he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, although the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you've kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they remained there many days. When you come to this gospel, this writer has ways of communicating that are going to tell you the direction he wants to take your thought in. It's easy to come to a text like this, and through the history of Christianity, you can see how this is done. I have heard this text preached on many times. I've heard it used in sermons as a justification for male and female at weddings, because that's all that would have been allowed in Judaism. I've heard this text used in it's the celebration of all committed relationships. I've heard this text used to prove that Jesus was divine. He did a miracle. I've heard this text used in sermons or primarily from other preachers. That frankly misses where the writer's going, because the writer's going to give you 2 clues. He wants you to think. There are 2 clues in the text. Now let's just look at the text as a text. First of all, you're looking at this first week of Jesus' ministry. You have the first day, and then you have the next day, and then you have in verse 29, then you have the next day in verse 35, and you have on the third day. And then you have the wedding at Cana. You're moving through this first week. The writer's structuring it as a week because the writer's showing you that he wants you to connect 2 things together. If you pay attention to this gospel writer, you will know the 2 things he wants you to connect are creation and the death of Jesus. This whole concept of this first week scenario is one indicator that you are to think in terms of the 7 days of creation. Of course, that's already been stressed in the prologue, hasn't it, when the writer says, all things came into being through him. This logos, the structuring principle of reality that is now here as Jesus of Nazareth at a wedding in the little village of Cana. That's the first thing he wants you to think of. Because the writer of this gospel has an understanding of creation that's quite different than the standard model. The standard model looks at creation as an event in the past, happened, big bang, boom. That's creation. Then we add on to that the category of redemption on the cross. So you have creation first, fall, redemption. You with me so far? That's the Platonic way to structure Christian doctrine. I've said before, and I'll say it again, the prologue to the Gospel of John is the third creation narrative in the Bible. You have Genesis 1 through 2:4. You have 2:5 and following through chapter 11. And here's the third creation narrative. This is the Christian creation narrative. It is the way we think about our relation to creation. We don't think of it structured as an event in the past, because for this writer, the creation is finished on the cross. That's why you have that great phrase, tetelestai, in John 19. It is finished. What is finished? The creation is finished. The true human, that which the Father sought to create and created well and perfectly, Jesus, the Son, and then through him all things are created. But the Father is creating the Son. That's the argument of this gospel. The Father is replicating the Father's self in the Son. That's where this gospel's going. Now, I mentioned that there are two clues in the text that are a signal to you of something here. The first is when Jesus says to his mother, "My hour has not yet come." The phrase, "my hour," is a technical term in the fourth gospel for the death of Jesus. And he will use this phrase later on in the Upper Room Discourse, which we will explore next month in the classroom of the Dude of Theology. He will use this phrase, "my hour," the time has come, with reference to his impending death, his crucifixion. So already in the Cana narrative, we have the first indicator that this particular event of turning water into wine has something to do with the death of Jesus. Now, of course, scholars are quick to point out that we look at the first great miracle of Moses, the turning of water to blood. Are we to assume here that water to wine, water to blood is an analogy? Well, let's ask this question. How many days are there in the creation narrative? There are 7, aren't there? Notice, at the end of this narrative, the writer says this is the beginning, the arche, the beginning, it doesn't say protos, the first, but he says this is the arche, the beginning of the signs that Jesus did. And then the next sign is in John chapter 4, the healing of the nobleman's son. And it says, this is the second sign. This writer does not call these events dunamis, miracles, as we would translate it into English, acts of power, displays of power, sky god stuff. No, for this writer, everything Jesus does is pointing to something else. In and of itself, a sign is nothing. It only has validity as it points or witnesses to something else. You are driving down the highway, and if you're in the United States, and I'll use us as an example, you can use your own country, and you see, and you're just one of those long, lonely stretches of road that you can be on in a country somewhere, and you see a sign, and that sign says such and such a town with an arrow. The sign represents the town. It is not the town. It's telling you or pointing you toward the town. The town is the point. In the same way, for this writer, all of these signs in and of themselves don't mean anything. They all point to something. How many signs are there? Well, let's count them. First, the wedding at Cana. Second, the healing of the nobleman's son. Third, John 5, the healing of the man at the pool of Bethsaida. Then you got to go all the way to the middle of John 6, where you have the feeding of the 5,000. Then the healing of the man born blind in John 9, and the raising of Lazarus from the grave in John 11. How many signs is that? 1, 2, 3. The fourth sign is the feeding of the 5,000. Fifth sign, the man born blind in John 9. Sixth sign, Lazarus. We need a 7th sign, don't we? 7 is the number of perfection. You would expect that if the writer's thinking in terms of the creation narrative, he is thinking of 7. What then is the 7th sign in the Gospel of John? When you look at the first sign, it has to do with water turned to wine or blood. When you look at the 4th sign, it has to do with the Eucharist, the munching of Jesus. Now, I pointed out in my Gospel of John YouTube series that the 7th sign is the crucifixion. That's what everything is pointing to. It is the sign that refers to itself. It's self-signifying in a sense, the event, the passion narrative. The first sign, Cana, the beginning, is a pointer to that. As is the Eucharistic narrative, the 4th sign, the passion narrative, which means that the miracles, the signs in the Gospel of John are structured chiastically. The 1st and the 7th belong together, the Cana wedding and the death of Jesus, the crucifixion. The 2nd sign, the healing of the nobleman's son, if you go backwards, the raising of Lazarus from the dead. The 3rd sign, the healing of the man at the pool, and then after the feeding of the 5,000, John 9, the healing of the man born blind. It forms an X pattern. A, B, C, D is in the middle, and then C prime, B prime, A prime. Suggests 2 things. First of all, if that theory holds, then there's no need for a so-called sign source. If there was a sign source, it would have perhaps not been structured that way. This is too tightly and intricately structured. 7 signs. And at the end of that 7th sign are the words, "It is finished." The creation of the true human is finished. The creation of the revelation of God in human flesh is finished. So is atonement finished. So is the destruction of the Satan finished. It's done. Already in this first sign, the writer wants us to understand that Jesus is going to take a path that will lead to his death. I'm not going to go with those that will say Jesus was born to die. Nor am I a fan of those who see Jesus having some sort of martyr complex. Nor do I believe that Jesus perceived himself in any way, shape, or form as a sacrifice that he had to make to assuage the anger of the Father. None of that comes into play here. What does come into play is Jesus' self-understanding of his death in this gospel. And he makes it very clear. He refuses victim status in this gospel. He knows what they're going to do to him. Everybody would look at it and we would say, this is a victim. But of course, later in this gospel, when his hour comes, he says, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own choice. But we're ahead of ourselves. So we have this event, this sign right at the beginning. Now, we would miss all of this if we failed to pay attention to the words, my hour, and also now down in verse 11, where the writer will say, this was the beginning sign, the foundational sign, the arche sign that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee when he manifested his glory. Now, this is where I've heard preachers use this text to say, see, Jesus manifests his glory, proves he can do miracles, he's divine, he's God's son, and this is what this is all about. That's not what it's saying. Glory in the Gospel of John is also a technical term for the cross. The writer uses the verb doxazo to glorify in an odd way. Normally, in sacred literature, Jewish and Christian, the verb doxazo, to glorify, means to lift up, to magnify, to exalt. This writer uses it with Jesus being lifted up in utter shame, humiliation, and debasement on the cross. Same with the verb hupsao, to exalt, refers to Jesus being exalted 6 feet off the ground. For this writer, the beginning of this sign, this proto-sign, this structural sign that's going to inform everything, has to do with the death of Jesus. Once he comes on the scene, he is a threat to all the religious, political, and other leadership everywhere. Synagogue leadership, it doesn't matter. He's a threat to all leadership. In the same manner, when Christ comes into the church today, he suffers. Oh, I suppose as a Protestant you're thinking of, oh, that's very Catholic, Michael. That's the way the Catholics understand the Mass. They're re-sacrificing Christ. The Catholics have a much better understanding of what's going on in the Eucharistic meal with this business of the re-sacrifice of Jesus than Protestants ever will. Because Protestants have turned the Eucharistic meal into something sanitized, fun, like a wedding. I remember back in the 70s, a church in LA celebrated Eucharist with French fries and martinis so they could be culturally irrelevant. This text is not about glory in the way we think. It is about suffering. It's a recognition that those who, in fact, do come into the world to change it will suffer. That's where the text is going, on that deeper structural level of the author's thinking. Exegetes will note all manner of things with regard to this text. Is Jesus dissing on Mother Mary when he says, you know, to see kai me, what to you and to me? They might note that Jesus submits to Mary's request, as is done in the Catholic tradition. All of this, you know, is there. But is it what the text really wants us to take away? Or does the text want us to understand that from the very start, when Jesus is revealed, he is revealed as the one who will take the central role in all human mythologies, that of the innocent or random victim, the scapegoat. And he does this of his own choice. How else could it be broken down if Jesus goes there involuntarily? Nothing is broken. Nothing happens. He's just another victim. But by choosing, and we see this in all 4 gospel accounts, and Paul doesn't mention any of this, of course, but we do see this in the gospel narratives. There is a decision by Jesus to accept this particular fate, this fate that involves a broken body, blood shed. This is a Eucharistic text, friends. It invites us to remember that the marriage supper of the Lamb has blood as well as bread, wine, the wine of the New Age, a different kind of blood, a blood that speaks a different word. Surely we know that by now. This blood speaks truth in this gospel, and that's why the writer later will connect blood, water, and spirit. It's a very sacramental gospel. And I invite you to ponder it on that level. Today or next week when you take Eucharist, remember that when Jesus turned the water into wine, it becomes the beginning of that which will lead to Calvary. And that's how this writer understands this sign. Until next week.